Good morning. This is Vermont Legislature's House Committee on Environment and Energy, and this morning we're going to continue taking testimony on S5, sorry. And we have with us Jay Green, Racial Equity Policy and Research Analyst with the Office of Racial Equity. Welcome, Jay Green.
Thank you very much, Chair Sheldon, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to give our office's comments on S5, the Affordable Heat Act. This is the second time that we're providing comments on this bill. We have also testified before Senate Natural Resources and Energy before it made crossover. I believe the request from the committee was to discuss sort of the equity concerns that might be brought forth in considering the Affordable Heat Act. The first and foremost concern of the Office of Racial Equity is that we don't yet understand how this legislation is going to impact the cost of heating for low and middle income Vermonters. And we are concerned that this legislation leaves that sort of unknown. But I do note that the current language does include a provision that requires the Public Utilities Commission to prepare a report that estimates the changes to heating cost. So that is somewhat comforting, but it's still challenging for our office to fully support the legislation without knowing what impacts it will have on the cost of heating for people. And we also just wanted to note that the cost to customers for implementing the kind of clean heat generating measures that are recommended, such as installing heat pumps, that can have a very high upfront cost. And I have some statistics here to share about that. So in the United States, there's been some economic research on after the COVID-19 pandemic started, there was some economic research done that indicates that there are racial disparities in the resiliency, the financial resiliency of different folks in America. So, for example, this research by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, just to give you an idea of the kind of financial burden that people are not able to handle, there's a significant gap in financial well-being between white adults and Black and Hispanic adults, which grew by 4 percentage points since 2017. And in addition, during this Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve survey, they found that 36% of adults out of the 11,000 households surveyed reported they would not be able to afford a $400 emergency expenditure without borrowing money, skipping paying their monthly bills, or carrying the balance forward on their credit cards. And so if people are unable to handle a $400 emergency expense, it's to understand how they're going to be expected to pay for, a $3,000 heat pump to, although I'm not sure, $3,000 may be too much for heat pump installation. I'm not exactly sure what the average cost of installing a heat pump is, but the point is that we're concerned about the upfront costs to people in low and middle incomes that are still unknowns. So now that I've communicated that sort of baseline, I would love to move forward with some suggestions for how we think that this bill could be improved. I wanted to start by letting you know that in our previous letter of testimony, we did recommend that the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee insert some language related to ensuring that there is adequate attention paid to language access during the public outreach process. And some language was inserted, but it was inserted, I believe, during one of the provisions related to obligated parties. I don't have the bill in front of me to tell you the exact line.
Yeah. I remember that from yesterday, but in our walkthrough, we saw that language.
Yes.
Representative Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. I've got a couple of questions for you. One more important than the other. Has anyone been briefed as to what lower income and families in distress, so to speak, are going to, is there a percentage that the state has offered to assist in heat pump installations or in any other form of energy efficiency? You
That
haven't said 10% or 20% or,
there, I believe there is language in the bill that directs the designated agents to provide a certain percentage of clean heat measures to low and middle income customers, but it doesn't detail exactly how that's going to be provided in terms of, is there going to be cost sharing between Vermonters and the designated agents and such. So the bill sort of leaves it up to the Public Utilities Commission to come up with any sort of cost sharing programs, or that's my understanding of the bill as currently
do
written.
you believe there'll still be a pretty big price tag for some people that are going to have to decide whether to pay for that or eat?
I think I really couldn't say one way or the other at this point. I think I'm not sure about that.
Okay, my last question. This was asked of me to ask you.
Mhm.
The Office of Racial Equity requested in the Senate that the penalty for fuel dealers, if they do not meet their carbon credit obligations, be a payment of 4 times the cost of the credits. So in the name of equity, should this law include a similar penalty for the default delivery agent if it does not retire the carbon credits for which it assumes the obligation?
I believe that our testimony was that we wanted to ensure that it didn't become sort of the cost of doing business for obligated parties to, if they missed the mark on retiring a sufficient number of clean heat credits. We didn't want it to just be the cost of doing business for them to continue to do business in Vermont. And that's why the amount of the penalty was changed from 3 times the cost of a clean heat credit to 4 times the cost. I don't believe the office has an official position on whether those penalties should apply to designated agents as well. I think off the top of my head that may be something that's better worked out from the Public Utilities Commission's rulemaking process. I'm not sure. I don't think that's something I can really comment on right now.
All right,
An informed perspective.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to make sure that you're through what you want to make sure we hear from you
Thank you. I appreciate that.
further off the path.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, so going back to the language access piece, when we had originally made the comment about language access, that was intended to apply to the public outreach process that the Public Utilities Commission will be engaging in, not necessarily to the outreach, not necessarily to the communications between the Public Utilities Commission and the obligated parties, which is how I read the current bill language. So please correct me if I'm incorrect, but given the current language that's in the statute, I would suggest that maybe that the section where that piece about language access goes needs to be put into the section related to public outreach instead of the section related to obligated parties.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. It's funny because it stood out to me yesterday when I saw it. It was all.
Yep.
So sorry, it needs to be moved to public outreach section. Yeah.
Another very small note that we had previously advocated for in Senate Natural Resources and Energy. The current language, it's on page 22 of the bill as passed by the Senate. It's D, list of eligible measures. The eligible clean heat measures delivered to or installed in Vermont shall include, and then it lists out 11 possible clean heat measures. And we're concerned that the very prescriptive language there is going to conflict with the ability of the technical advisory group to actually pull back on one or more of those listed measures if they turn out to have negative environmental impacts that perhaps the legislature hasn't considered yet. So we would advocate for changing that language of instead of shall include, or maybe say something like that shall be considered by the technical advisory group, just so that the legislature is being clear about its intent that the technical advisory group considers all of these 11 measures that are currently listed, but that the technical advisory group still has meaningful input into whether some of these listed measures, for example, green hydrogen is a measure that I've done a little bit of reading into, and I'm concerned about whether that stays on that list or not. I think the technical advisory group will need to weigh in on whether green hydrogen is really truly green or not. So that was just a brief note about the language related to the list of eligible measures. Yeah, and you know, we previously mentioned that we are concerned about the income disclosure requirements, and I did see that language was added to make sure that the data collected on income is kept confidential to the Public Utilities Commission and the Department of Public Service and obligated parties. So we just wanted to reiterate our call to the Public Utilities Commission and the other agencies involved to please be careful and deliberate in your rulemaking to ensure that people who are disclosing their income statuses in order to ensure that those clean heat measures are delivered to low and middle income customers are protected from that sensitive information being disclosed. So not necessarily a note for the legislature, but definitely a note for any of the Public Utilities Commission or Department of Public Service folks who may be watching this testimony. Yeah, the substantive part of my comments today that I wanted to focus on were actually the equity advisory group that's currently written into this bill. What I've brought with me today among the papers that are in front of me includes the report of the Executive Director of Racial Equity for 2023. And in our yearly report from the Executive Director of Racial Equity, I'm just going to read a little bit from it. The list of equity-related working groups created or led by the state has grown in the last year. And the ever-expanding list of work groups that focus on equity issues is growing at a pace that is not commensurate to the actual need for more working groups. And I'm happy to provide the committee with a list of all of the working groups that we can participate in after this meeting, but there are a great deal, and some of them have been excellent for many years, and we have yet to see any progress on some of the recommendations that were made, for example, by the Racial Equity Task Force. It's been 3 years since the publication of the first report, and we're still waiting on the legislature to make some of the recommended changes that were put forth by the Racial Equity Task Force report. So we are questioning the need for another equity-related working group to exist. Especially, I wanted to note that I believe the Equity Advisory Group was added before the passage of Act 154 of 2022, which created the Environmental Justice Advisory Council to the Agency of Natural Resources. So in addition to the Environmental Justice Advisory Council, there's also the Vermont Climate Council. There are several working groups related to climate and equity already extant in the state. And what the Office of Racial Equity would like to propose is that instead of creating yet another equity advisory group, that the legislation be shifted to focus so that the facilitator or consultant who is hired to do the public outreach does that public outreach in a way that meaningfully contributes to the rulemaking process for the Public Utilities Commission. Rather than saying, we're going to take 10 community members, pay them $50 per meeting, and then ask them to do work outside of the meetings, and then rely on their advice to do this rulemaking process. Let's shift it so that we're using the facilitator who's already built into this bill and already asked for and already funded to actually seek input from a broader group of stakeholders throughout the state. And really, I've had our office has equity liaisons who we have one or more representatives from most of the executive branch agencies who meet with our office on a regular basis for each other updated on kind of equity related work, and also to do professional trainings and development. And we've been in contact with the equity liaisons from the Agency of Transportation, who went through a similar process to do their transportation equity framework with a public outreach facilitator, and they've reported very positive results from that process. So rather than creating another equity advisory group, let's take that funding that's going to be put toward per diems for the equity advisory group, and let's funnel that into the funding for the facilitated outreach process instead. And let's make sure that the language of the bill is clear that the facilitated outreach process should inform the rulemaking process, that it should be going on at the same time, and that the Public Utilities Commission staff should be open to changing the rulemaking process in response to the public outreach feedback. Yeah, so that was the summary of the testimony that our office would like to provide at this point on S5. And I greatly appreciate your time today, and I'm happy to take any more questions from the committee.
Great, thank you. Representative Stebbins.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Jay, with regards to your last comment, do you feel like it would be helpful at all to have some directional language connecting the work back to the Environmental Justice Council, or no real need, just focus on using it as something that's required?
I think I would like to hear the Institute of Natural Resources is in the process of recruiting and setting up. I think there's only been one. I could be wrong, but I believe there's only been one meeting of the Environmental Justice Advisory Council so far. I'm not 100% certain of that, but they're still in the beginning stages of that group forming, and so I think I would want to reach out to my colleagues at ANR and ask them if that is additional, if the Environmental Justice Advisory Council can take on that additional work. Perhaps it would be useful to have some language in there, like directing the Public Utilities Commission, like they could consult with one of the extant groups, like the Environmental Justice Advisory Council or the Climate Council. Yeah, I guess I'm hoping that's helpful. There's still questions in my mind about whether what's been asked of the Environmental Justice Advisory Council is, how big is their capacity to take on additional work? Because I don't want to assign them additional work without first consulting with the people who are on that council.
Representative Pat.
Earlier you had stated the concern about lower income people and the cost of a heat pump as an example. And I'm just wondering, since nothing in the bill requires anybody to replace an existing heating system that's working, why that would be a significant concern.
So clean heat measures, including the installation. The installation of a clean heat of a heat pump is one of the in that section where it says that the Public Utilities Commission shall consider the following 11 items to be methods of creating clean heat standards. So I'm using that as an example because the installation of a heat pump is one of the 11 measures that can be used to create a clean heat credit. Yeah, but I think that if you look at many of those lists, many of the items on that list, the ways that clean heat credits can be created, that many of those do require consumers to make an upfront investment in, weatherization services, in installation of a heat pump, in transitioning from one source of fuel to heat their home to another source of fuel. So what we're trying to communicate is that the upfront cost is a potential concern for people who, if you can't afford a $400 emergency expense, how are you supposed to afford, even if it'll save you money 10 years in the future, how are you supposed to afford the upfront expense right now? That's a concern that we're trying to raise.
Understood, but what I'm asking is, since there is no requirement that anyone do that, although if someone's heating system has failed, then they would have they would have a problem paying for whatever replace their heating system, whether it was a heat pump or a replacement of the same. I'm not sure that since no one is forced to do that, how much of a concern that is.
Well, you're saying no one's forced to do it, but the bill does specify that 16, I believe the number was 16% of the clean heat credits generated each year need to come from low income customers. So in order for the obligated parties to meet their requirements under the rulemaking that we've put forth. So they are going to be targeting low and middle income folks for outreach and saying, we want to help you upgrade your house insulation, upgrade your weatherization, your heat pump, whatever. And so you're saying that no one's being forced to do it, but I think that the language of the bill makes clear that the clean heat credits are going to have to be generated partially from low and middle income customers. So they will be pressured to weatherize and upgrade heat systems no matter what, just to meet those 16% targets.
Representative Sibilia, then Stebbins.
Yes, I really appreciate this point. So pressured, I think, though, when we're talking about creating a market is probably the wrong word. Incentivize, I think, is the other word. And incentives is probably the word that we're really thinking about when we're talking about low income folks. When we create a market like this and we're looking at targeting low income folks, what that is likely to mean in here is the provision of very significant incentives and grants for clean heat measures for our lowest income Vermonters. I really appreciate the suggestions that you've made, and I'd like to follow up with you specifically on some of the language. And another question that I had for you was, did the office weigh in? Vermonters that use heating oil are paying about $2,400 more a year this year than they were 2 years ago. Has the office weighed in with either the PUC or the Department of Public Service on that and measures that we might use to ameliorate that expense on low-income Vermonters?
I have not spoken with the Public Utilities Commission specifically about addressing the high cost of heating oil. And as someone who I rent my apartment, but I do pay for my own heating oil, I acutely feel that statement. I have paid about $2,400 for heating this winter, and it's been quite the drain. So I think that is a great suggestion for future legislative action or potentially rulemaking action on the part of the Public Utilities Commission. I'm not an expert on how fuel prices are regulated, so I couldn't tell you exactly what lever to pull to influence that process.
They're not.
But,
and so that's part of the problem that we're facing is we actually can't do anything right now other than just, if we have money, give money out for low-income Vermonters who are facing that. And so part of this, a very significant part of what we're trying to take on here is to really transition this market into something that helps us move away and use less fossil fuels and that volatility. Thank you again. And I would like to follow up on some specific places and language changes that you suggested. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, I mean, we're talking about creating a market, and if the existing market has produced exorbitant heating fuel costs, I guess that I'm a little concerned about the reliance on market dynamics if the existing market dynamics have already produced these really expensive dynamics. So
this is creating a regulated market as opposed to an unregulated market.
Correct.
Yes.
Great.
Representative Stebbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just, I hear your concern, and I wonder, we have like a number of programs, like for 60% and below, we have, weatherization that covers the full cost, which would reach that 16% that you're like concerned about. I wonder if it would be helpful. Do you think it would be helpful, like in the findings section, to like sort of mention the programs that exist so that folks reading this bill are like, oh, okay, we understand that there are other pieces not in this bill that are solutions to some of the concerns that may be raised in this bill, if you don't know about those other programs.
Yeah, that certainly couldn't hurt to be more transparent about, the reasoning behind trusting programs that exist to cover sort of the upfront costs, as Representative Pat and I were discussing. Yeah, I see no reason why that would be a bad thing to add that language to the finding section and remind folks about the existing programs that are available. Yeah.
All right. Thank you
Thank
again
you.
for your testimony and your flexibility in joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll submit some written notes, and I do have business cards if anyone needs to email.
I would like. Please.
Yes, for sure. My email is j.green@vermont.gov. So
Hey, members, just a moment of public service announcement here. We're going to have an amendment this morning on H126 that we'll have to take a break from the floor onto here. And Tuesday, I don't think I had that far. There's going to be a joint assembly. You should have gotten that notification in the afternoon. We're going to start at a regular, you're going to be on the floor at 10, just like we always are, of the joint assembly, and then either go back to the floor if there's more business after that, or we're going to finish the walkthrough with Ellen. But note that we need to find a time as soon as possible to finish that walkthrough with Ellen. So just look for any kind of, when there's a little space in there, we might squeeze it in. So